Right. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. People is getting into the meeting room right now, so we'll hold for a few seconds until we start. Great. Let's start. We're seeing people joining in right now on this Zoom meeting. So welcome everybody. Hello, it's great to have you with us today. And thanks for making the time to join to us in this opening session for the 2022 criteria consultation of Race to Zero. My name is Ramiro Fernandez. I'm the campaign director at the Climate Champions team, and I will be hosting the session today. So let me start with a few housekeeping messages for you to be aware. First, as you all can see, this session is being recorded to share more broadly. And in the session will be in English, but the recorded version, we will have translations into French, Spanish, and Arabic. So we would really encourage you to share this event after it is done for others and your networks community to see it and to have all the information on the campaign and Race to Zero. We do expect to have a 15-minute Q&A at the end. And I know the speakers we're going to be my allies on making that happen and taking the time to ensure that we have that time to get your questions and your answers. We would really appreciate if during the session you can write and type your questions on the chat. We've got quite a broad audience today. We have over about 380 people registered for the event, which is amazing, and we're very proud of it. And if we don't manage to answer all the questions and concerns, we will take them and answer them and make them published in the website after the event. So please don't hesitate to type your questions if you have them. So for this, as you all know, since the launch of Race to Zero, the high-level champions has committed to review the criteria of the starting line of Race to Zero in an annual basis. We set up a criteria consultation process to the first stage of launching the campaign. We have a second review last year in 2020, which helped us to clarify and strengthen the Race to Zero criteria very much. And now we are starting and launching the third process this year on the criteria revision. You will be able to see, you have already for the last year, we already have some interpretation guides and lexicons, tools and information that you can use for Race to Zero to see how is the criteria currently. And we are all very much aware that after Glasgow, we are entering into a completely new phase of the campaign, where the contribution to accelerate the implementation of our commitments, it is critical. And that is why for this year onwards, we are honing in and making efforts in the planning and the proceed components of the 4 Ps. So we will expect these criteria consultations to do a deep dive on how we can support and strengthen the planning phase and implementation phase of the actions to reach this net zero target. And we will really expect that this campaign, this process will help us to enhance and strengthen the Race to Zero criteria and campaign and working with all of you during this process. The outline for the session today, it's going to be, we very pleased to have Nigel Topping, high-level climate champion of the UK, joining with us today. And we'll give the floor to him. Then Dani Magalhães, which is the Global Climate Action team lead at UNFCCC, will share the perspective of the UNFCCC process and the engagement to Race to Zero, the role that the campaign plays under the broader process. And then we will hand over to the 2 co-chairs of the expert peer review group, which is Tom Hale, Associate Professor at the University of Oxford, and Paula Ellinger, which is the Director of Climate Action at Avina, that they will walk us through the whole process of the consultation, the criteria consultations that's going to happen during the next couple of months. And we are also delighted to have today 2 expert peer review group members, which is Jess Andrews, Director of the UNEP Finance Principal Responsible Initiative, and Lisa Benjamin, is Assistant Professor at Lewis and Clark Law School, who they will share their reflections and from their perspective on the expert peer review group, how this criteria consultation process helps to strengthen and make more robust all net zero targets in long term. For those in this session who are do not very much aware about the role of this expert peer review group, this is an independent group that was set up under the Race to Zero campaign by the high-level champions, which is with a great group of people and with academic scientists and other practitioners that are in a voluntary basis providing their independent recommendations to the champions on the criteria and all the issues related to approving and considering new partner initiatives under the campaign. All this work they do is help us very much to strengthen the integrity and the credibility of the campaign for the long term. And we're very grateful for their support and helping us on this. So thanks very much for all of you for joining today. And with this brief introduction, I would like to hand on the floor to Nigel to give us some key reflections on the launch of this process today. Nigel, back to you.
Thank you so much, Rama, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. And I think I can still say Happy New Year until Burns Night, which is tomorrow. Those of you who know Scottish culture will know that's a night of poetry and whiskey drinking. So I'll still say Happy New Year. I'm really excited to be kicking off 2022 together. As Rama's laid out, we've got a lot of work to do. You may have seen Alok Sharma, the COP president, gave a speech today laying out his vision and his objectives for the year, and delivery's the watchword. I think making sure that all of the promises made in Glasgow across state and non-state are delivered. And so that's at the heart of this conversation. Alok and I have both been out to Egypt recently. It was my second trip. I went out just before COP, before the Egyptian was formally announced as presidency. It's great to see they've already announced who their presidency team. So Foreign Minister Shukri and Environment Minister Fouad, very much working in tandem. We've had a great reception in Egypt. There's a real enthusiasm for getting on with the accelerated transition and learning about the work of the non-state actors, which of course many governments are not so familiar with. So we've been out there explaining that. We haven't got an Egyptian champion named yet, but the champions team and the plan which was presented and welcomed very much at COP26 is in motion, and we're looking to have several members of the team hired locally in Cairo so they can provide better support to the two champions, to me and the Egyptian champion. And I'm hopeful that we'll have an Egyptian champion appointed by the middle of February, but of course that's a decision for the Egyptian government. So I just thought, just by way of introduction, I just thought it's worth taking stock of where we're at. Look, first of all, thanks to many of you and many others not on the call, we've really seen the mainstreaming of the clear objective of getting to net zero by mid-century at the latest, with 9 of the 10 biggest economies now committed to net zero, and with depending whether you count hospitals as individual organizations, 7,000 or 15,000 organizations in the race to zero, including over 1,000 cities, 1,000 universities, nearly 500 financial institutions, and over 5,000 businesses. So we collectively have done an amazing job of listening to the science and embedding it in pledges. But we all know that not every pledge is credible, that not all pledges have the same detailed thinking behind them. And in particular, we all know that some of them are not credible. And so the Race to Zero partners, all these initiatives that, thanks to the EPRG, the champions are able to welcome into the Race to Zero campaign, are playing that critical role in separating the good, credible net zero entities, those who are committed to and acting on the science, and those who are greenwashing. So the campaign's all about setting a minimum floor, and then the partners do all the heavy lifting of rallying non-state actors all around the economy to take the immediate actions needed and to play their fair share in halving their emissions by 2030. So we're really focused on delivery on this year, on this decade. Now, yes, the context is the long-term goal, but it's really all about this decade. We've seen the campaign recognized by both the G7 and the G20 and by many national governments at COP. My favorite quote from the COP was the representative of the Dominican Republic on behalf of the small island states, talking about all the work that you have all done and all the other Marrakesh Partnership initiatives in mobilizing the non-state actors, saying that this momentum was beyond their wildest dreams when they envisioned mobilizing non-state actors back in Lima and Paris. And so we know that these campaigns with non-state actors are helping to drive ambition in the state sector as well, the ambition loop that Gonzalo and I always talk about, and I'm sure that the Egyptian champion and I will continue to talk about. But part of this process is to recognize that a lot of this is still very new, which is why we committed from the beginning to this annual revision of criteria and only an upward improvement in the quality of those criteria and in ambition. Because we know that, as Alok said again today, 1.5 degrees is barely alive. And so we need real clarity of purpose and urgent action to drive the systemic change that we're all working towards. So I think we're really pleased to see that Race to Zero criteria are already starting to influence wider change. We've seen them influencing international standards through ISO and the teams in conversation with ISO. We've seen them used as part of legal processes to hold businesses accountable. They were referred to in the Shell case, for example. And we see many of the partner initiatives all already ratcheting their ambition and that of their members. Just to name a couple, the Under 2 Coalition, it was really exciting in Glasgow to be there at the launch of their revised MOU for the nearly 300 states and regions. And with Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, joking that they'll probably have to change their name because they're not focused on Under 2 anymore, but on net zero by 2050. Of course, the cities Race to Zero, cities continue to be real drivers of ambition. As of 2022, every city in the City Race to Zero has to now provide an annual report on progress made towards their 2050 or earlier, in many cases, targets. And we've also seen the really great development in the global corporates of decarbonisation requirements now starting to be introduced into the supply chain under our business partner initiatives. So, and we're also seeing the advocacy of Race to Zero members playing advocacy around those who are skeptical, right? Vanessa Nakate summed it up really well, which is, we don't believe you, but please prove us wrong. And we see that the skepticism plays an important role, although the skepticism needs to engage with details and not just generics. That's because all of this is now about details. What constitutes good, what bad, what ugly. So we need that scrutiny, but we need it to be keeping pace with the technical work so that it's scrutinizing at the level of detail relevant. And we want to keep on calling in those entities that are not doing enough. So what's this criteria consultation about? It's, first of all, it's not in isolation. It's one of 3 pillars that the team are working on. Of course, firstly, defining best practice. Then, and that's what this is about. But then beyond that, we are working on how to hold people accountable to ensure best practice is implemented, and how organizations get removed through a fair and transparent process if they're not, maintaining compliance with the criteria. Remember, this is nearly all done by the partner initiatives already, and the expert peer review group in their advice to the champions. Already nearly 50% of the initiatives that have applied to become partners have been rejected because they didn't meet the campaign criteria. And already partner initiatives have strong mechanisms to remove members who don't meet the criteria. I know, for example, SBTI and Exponential Roadmap have clear criteria. I know about SBTI because I was on the board when we introduced that criteria at the very beginning in 2014, and it started to bite a couple of years later. But we also know that strengthening accountability is going to require better measurement for the third pillar, really, which is tracking progress. And the UN Climate Secretariat and many others in the Canada community are already doing a really good job on that. And we've been invited now to contribute to the 2023 global stocktake And so the quality of that progress tracking is going to become even more important as it influences the stock take. I think that one other thing that you may have heard of in the opening World Leaders Summit was the Secretary General launching an expert group to look at the issue of the quality of claims and the credibility of targets. So we're looking forward to that being launched soon. The terms of reference have been, I think, nearly finalised, and so we're hoping that that group will be launched soon, and that can help elevate quality, and I think in particular for us, accelerate the move from voluntary initiatives to policy. We know that every market needs to be moved by regulation, and we've seen finally the work of organisations like CDP and CDSB turn into TCFD and finally be regulated in terms of disclosure in some countries. We can't wait 20 years for voluntary net zero targets to become mandatory ones. So that's going to be an important part of what that expert group does. So I'm really excited that we're at this point now where we are starting the critical consultation process. Also, I want to thank the team for making sure that all this material is going to be available in French, Spanish, and Arabic. There's always more we can and need to do to make this a more inclusive and diverse process, but I think that's a really good step forward. We think that the Race to Zero, and through all the partner work, has already pioneered the mainstreaming of net zero and can help accelerate that transition from voluntary to regulatory. And with that in mind, I'd encourage you all to actively engage in the process and look forward to your contributions. Together, we're much smarter than a few people in a room on their own. And we are also consciously reaching out to get more input from more diverse voices this year. So in summary, I'd say, look, it's very clear why we need to do this to keep 1.5 alive. And we know what we need to do is to define and then implement robust net zero commitments. So the real focus now is on how we implement at the speed required. So I'd like to end by thanking all of you for joining us. There's a lot of people on the line, and I know many, many more colleagues that you'll be reaching out to and working with. I'd like to especially thank the expert peer review group for helping to continuously strengthen the integrity and the credibility of the Race to Zero. I think that was a very good design decision of ours, not to try and do that work within the Champions team, but to have a global group of experts, and they've been amazing. And with that, I'd like to hand over to dear friend Danny to share some reflections from the UN Climate Change Secretariat. Danny, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. It's an enormous pleasure for me to be here with you and with the partners of the Race to Zero and many other stakeholders and different sectors and areas. I think I would do like Nigel because I haven't seen many of you. So wishing you all a happy and healthy new year. So being part of the Race to Zero is taking a step forward to combat climate change. It is also embracing inclusive multilateralism by supporting parties in this process. For the enormous challenges that we are facing with climate change, only global answers can solve global problems. And so it is important that multilateralism, but it needs to be inclusive. It means inclusive multilateralism that is not only intergovernmental, but in which we try to bring into the multilateral process all those that are today the key actors in society. And they are the cities, they are the regional and state level policymakers, they are the business communities and the civil society in general, which means most of you here. The Race to Zero is trying to do that by taking into account actions from all, and with this supported the UNFCCC process to achieve the long goal of the Paris Agreement to net zero and the 1.5 degrees Celsius that was kept alive with the Glasgow Pact. Climate change is moving faster than we are. So it's clear that we need a very strong increase in ambition. The Race to Zero showed this positive side towards the increase of ambition with the contribution from all of these different actors, to all of you, showing that it's possible to achieve net zero before mid-century. And this gives hope. And that's what we really need in this very difficult times. Gives hope that we will be in an acceleration movement that that the fact that these stakeholders are more and more active and they are engaging with the public opinion, and through public opinions and their actions are influenced in government decisions and making this a great ambition loop, as just said by Nigel. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres highlighted at the high-level event of the Champions at COP26 that climate action requires all hands on deck. He stated the necessity to zoom in on the quality of implementation plans and has declared his decisions to establish a high-level expert group to put both clear stance to measure and analyze net zero commitments of non-state actors. So as already said by Nigel, it's on its way. And this is exactly what the Race to Zero is doing here, ensuring to keep checking the quality of its criteria, that the criteria continue evolving as we evolve with climate action, and ensure that the quality and ambition from all its partners. So that's a very important thing, and it works all together with the ideas and plans from the UN Secretary General. And so today is the start of this consultation. So it's great to have you all here working together on this and help ensuring a robust campaign to demonstrate the potential of non-state actors to help achieve the 1.5 net zero and resilient future. So thanks to all of you. I would like to already excuse myself that I will not be able to stay for the full time of the meeting, but wishing you all a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. I believe I will jump in next. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Tom Hale. I'm a professor at Oxford University, and I am the co-chair of the Expert Peer Review Group, which is a great honor to serve on a campaign that I think is really making a difference on our transition to net zero. Just to remind you, the Expert Peer Review Group, as Ramiro was mentioning, is an independent body created by high-level climate champions, but independent of the champions team that advises the champions on different applications from initiatives and partners that would like to join Race to Zero. And we, as colleagues, apply the Race to Zero criteria to those applications and advise the champions on which ones meet the starting line criteria and which ones still have a bit of work to do to get up to that frontier of best practice. We also review all the partners each year and contribute to the annual consultation process, which is the occasion that brings us all together here now. So let me just say a few words about what we're thinking in terms of this consultation process and how everyone on this call, and hopefully everyone listening to this recording, and really everyone who would like to, can have a chance to contribute to it, because as Nigel said, we are much smarter collectively than individually. So to underscore an important point that Nigel is making, we're really at an inflection moment with net zero as a concept. It's gone kind of from the scientific literature to the aspirations of the Paris Agreement and the IPCC to a really core organizing principle for climate action in a very short period of time. And we're now, having made success in winning the argument of what the destination should be, need to do more work to accelerate our progress toward it and to figure out some of the complicated details and dynamics that apply across the wide range of actors we see in Race to Zero. So the race can really support this big social process going on around the whole ecosystem of climate action by helping refine how we think about that frontier of best practice, how we promote all actors to get closer to that frontier of best practice, and how we can collectively push that forward. So even though this consultation we're launching today is an exercise in thinking about how the Race to Zero campaign should address its criteria, it's also something much bigger than that. It's about helping bring together the climate action community as a whole to think through these challenges together and to leverage the unique value that a thing like Race to Zero, a UN umbrella campaign, can play in that broader ecosystem. And to do that, we're building on a few years' experience, a fairly good base, I would say, to launch the discussion today. As was mentioned, this is the third annual consultation. The first took place in spring 2020, and this was even before the Race to Zero campaign was launched. It was a precursor to try to think about how the campaign could best support action. You'll remember that in spring 2020, there was also the emergence of the global COVID-19 pandemic, so it was really a fervent moment for thinking about these questions in lots of ways. But the outcome of that first consultation was a list of 4 so-called starting line criteria: pledge, plan, proceed, and publish, the basis of the Race to Zero campaign, and a few leadership practices on offsetting and also on the scope of emissions covered. That first set of consultations gave us a good basis, but the next year we had a number of more participants, about twice as many people engaged in the consultations, and they made a number of important refinements to help us clarify be more precise about what exactly pledge, plan, proceed, and publish mean, and to think more about how the scope of mission should be covered, how to deal with sinks and credits. And they also added a new criterion on equity. How do we think about equity in the net zero transition? They also contributed to the publication of a Race to Zero lexicon, a kind of list of words defining these terms that are being used now widely across the world, but not always in the same way. So using the Race to Zero to try to help converge our language as a way to reduce friction in our work together. And also in that second consultation, we saw the publication of an interpretation guide to give it more clarity about how the expert peer review group is interpreting the criteria for different kinds of actors. That was then built on further in 2021 by a sort of bonus consultation that's carried out in autumn of 2021, just before the COP, where the Race to Zero campaign solicited written comments on a number of key topics that had come up. And this was really helpful in informing the current set of fully fledged, full-blown consultation we're now launching today. But in this new consultation today, we actually need to, we think, take a step forward in the process we use, because the conversation on net zero has gotten a lot further ahead. It's gotten more complicated in some ways, and it's also gotten a lot bigger. And that means we need to rise to this challenge, just as we're accelerating and not staying put in this transition, in this race. We need to take a sort of bigger step forward on how we think about the consultations on the criteria. So this is a good problem to have. It shows that we have a discussion that's gotten bigger, and Race to Zero, I think, has helped to drive that conversation. But we know we can't sort of solve all the problems that we're looking at now just by having a number of Zoom calls with dozens and hundreds of people on them. We need to have a more elaborate process. So if we could bring up the slide, I can walk through the basic thinking here, because the objective of this third annual consultation is really to combine depth with breadth, and to do so in an open, transparent, and inclusive way to help us all collectively take a big step forward together. So we've are kicking off today, but we're going to focus this consultation a little bit differently, whereas previous consultations have gone through different kinds of actors one by one. So looked at cities in one session or in businesses in another session. This time we're going to focus on some of the cross-cutting issues and themes that have really risen up. And my colleague Paula will say a few more words about what those are and why we selected them in a moment. But the idea here is that we've actually kind of got a baseline of what a good set of best practices looks like for a city or a business. We have these big partner initiatives, umbrella campaigns that are driving that forward. What we need to help all of us do now is think more in depth about some of the really knotty details that come up in those in their operation and implementation of those discussions. So we have a lot of work to do on that front. Also, as Ramiro mentioned, we have a real important pivot to think about implementation and delivery. And so the plan and proceed criteria will be particularly important areas of focus. So given this role of different topics and the importance of these topics, we're going to have a working group discussion structure. We're going to create some working groups which are going to be open for people to join on the different topics that are really the thorny ones, holding us back from moving faster and moving more clearly toward the goals we all have in common. And so those are going to be working sessions throughout January and March, but they're not going to be some sort of backroom deal where some people come up with the answer. They're going to be an inclusive process where we try to have a bit more time and space to dig deeper, as opposed to having just a single Zoom session on it. The outputs of those working groups will then be published publicly. So all of the outcomes will be brought together for people to consider. And then there'll be a period for comment, discussion, feedback from everyone and anyone who maybe didn't have time to join a whole working group on it, but still has an important experience or perspective or bit of expertise to bring to bear on a subject at hand. And then all of that will feed back into the expert peer review group and to the champions team, who will think about how to take it forward. Let me just close by saying a few words about the outcome of this process. So of course, we're looking for ideas on how the Race to Zero criteria can be made more precise and more effective in helping us drive to rigorous, robust implementation of the targets that we're setting. To be clear about what that minimum floor of best practice is, but also to help people think toward the ceiling, to think about what we can reach for in the height of our ambition. We're going to harvest innovations from across our community. So we know there's a lot of discussions happening on various topics in different fora, and we're not going to try to duplicate those, but instead to bring them in. And we're also going to get inputs on our lexicon so that our language helps us converge toward working together. As I said before, the indirect outputs are also really important. So we're going to be taking all this information into the Race to Zero campaign, but hopefully the process itself is also a useful way to have some really important conversations across the community using this unique tool of a UN umbrella campaign to bring together a really wide set of perspectives on the most important questions we're all grappling with now. Some of those will be contentious. We're not necessarily thinking that unanimity will be the outcome we all get to, but we're hoping we can at least deliver some really important progress in how we all think about this race. So the final thing to say is just a huge thanks for your interest. We can't wait to work with all of you on helping us advance this conversation. And let me turn now to my co-chair, Paula Ellinger, to say a bit more about how we can work together to get to that outcome. Paula, over to you, please. Paula, I think you might still be muted.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thanks, Tom, for handing over. It's a real pleasure to join you here today and serve as co-chair to the expert peer review group. So I will continue the presentation by Tom on the current consultation process, sharing with you more details on the composition and functioning of the working groups and how to apply to those if you're interested in participating of this debate. So as Tom already highlighted, the working groups is the space where deep diving on topics takes place. As you see now on the screen, thanks Fiona for sharing, we have identified 8 topics for the working groups. The topics, they have been selected and identified through conversations and discussions with the expert peer review group, the civil society and Race to Zero partners. And it's not a fresh start. As Tom already highlighted, we are rather proposing a process that's part of an ongoing conversation and where we hope to bring partners, experts, the climate action community as a whole together in a collective space to discuss the frontier of knowledge and of best practices. So we understand that as we identify the topics for discussions, there's different levels of debate going on around each of these topics. And in order to recognize the different stages and to avoid duplications of conversations, and also to specify how far we intend to go at this moment in each of the topics, we have organized them around 3 categories that you can see here on the screen. Category 1 regards topics where there's already good discussion taking place in different forums and where we hope that working groups can integrate the content of these discussions into Race to Zero criteria, rather than launching a separate new discussion on these topics. Category 2 regards a topics where we hope that the working group can initiate discussions with the intention of making concrete recommendations for the champions on either strengthening and enhancing existing minimal criteria, or introducing a new criteria, or deciding on whether to establish leadership guidance around this topic. And third, the third category regards topics that require deeper discussions with the view of introducing relevant criteria amendments in the future. So it's a space for initiating deeper discussions for future amendments. Each of these working groups, and you see here all the topics on the screen: net zero finance and disclosure of climate-related risks, offsetting carbon removals and responsible communication of claims, transition plans and immediate action, scope 3 boundaries and historic emissions, nature, land use and deforestation, policy advocacy and engagement, fair share, equity and justice, and fossil fuel transition. Each of them will work around the same questions. The questions are formulated in a way that the groups can discuss how the topic is currently reflected into Race to Zero criteria and also in practice, but also go beyond and establish recommendations on how it could be best addressed and how Race to Zero could encourage leadership around these topics. We also hope that groups can identify barriers that have been preventing progress around these areas. The groups will be provided with a template to work around these key questions. And I see that there was some questions on how much time we can foresee that these working groups will take. We are considering around 7 weeks of work, and throughout these weeks, we calculate that members would dedicate from 2 to 5 hours per week, meeting 2 to 4 times, more or less. These details are specified in the terms of reference that's published on the Race to Zero website, and that's also going to be posted here in the chat. Now, okay, once groups unite and discuss around these questions, they will work with a specific template that will be then submitted to the champions in an advisory capacity. I think that's important to highlight, that the champions will then assess and analyze the recommendations of amendments and decide which ones will be incorporated into the minimal criteria, interpretation guide, and lexicon. Now, well, these were quite detailed, but I think it's important for you to understand how these working groups will work. And I hope that many, or some of you at least, are motivated to join these deeper conversations or have ideas of people who might be interested. And in this case, what is the way to go is to send an expression of interest using the link that's shared here on the screen until January 28th. Until the coming Friday, we're going to be receiving expressions of interest, and the champions will then analyze applications in order to define groups of 5 to 15 people that are diverse enough. Here on the screen, you can see what we hope that the working groups can have in terms of compositions. We hope to have working groups that are diverse in terms of gender, expertise, and geography. Understanding and recognizing that is through a diversity of perspectives in the same space that we can ensure rich conversations. So if the groups are strong and diverse enough, the champions will communicate to the selected members by email, and work will start on the week of January 31st. And well, I think that are key features that we would like to share on the working of the working groups. I would like to highlight that while the guiding questions are proposed and part of a template, we do hope and welcome that the working groups can go beyond the questions and make other types of recommendations and amendments as well, especially thinking on how to put criteria into practice and how to identify the connections with resilience. With that, I would like to give the floor to my colleague from the Expert Peer Review Group and Senior Project Manager at UNEP FI, Jessica Andrews. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Paula. I'm so delighted to be here. I was asked to speak about the purpose of this process and what that purpose means to me. And for me, that is really depth and clarity. Getting to zero really is our century's moonshot, and a journey like this does not take place overnight. So we are here to deepen our understanding together and to really provide more clarity where necessary to those who are, really running this race. So as you've heard, the goal of Race to Zero is really to support companies, investors, subnationals to credibly proceed towards net zero. And to kick that off, the Race to Zero and the EPRG set out these broad parameters for credibility. So these 4 Ps: pledge, plan, proceed, publish. And in that criteria has really helped convene a really wide range of actors. We've heard over 5,000 companies, nearly 500 financial institutions, over 50 subnational regions. And as a result, they've been able to bring together a credible, globally recognized movement towards net zero. And they're supporting each other in this ecosystem, especially, as Nigel says, in the absence of standardization from policy. And it's really up to these actors, and with the support of all of you, to help deepen that and make this criteria even clearer and more crisp and more credible as we keep going. Credibly moving towards net zero is an incredibly complex process. We are faced with a lot of questions around how we can set common standards for such a diverse group of actors, either by industry or by geography. Indeed, what is a fair share for a small company in an emerging economy? And what is a fair share for a global investor whose portfolio emissions are invested in thousands of companies all around the world and providing capital to that small company in that emerging economy? How do we model and account for Scope 3 emissions and company targets when these emissions are largely driven by your household and my households and our use of the product of these companies? What do we do about offsets? How do we measure progress and report on it? What KPIs do we use? So we are really moving beyond this starting line, and we are really, in the depths of this, and these are really challenging questions. For example, this March, the IPCC Working Group 3 will publish the next iteration of climate scenarios, and all of us should be using that to further hone and understand our understanding of fair share. As new science becomes available, these companies can reassess their plans and update them so that they're progressing in the most efficient way. Unfortunately, we have 3 decades left to win a race that we have been losing for a century. It's a good thing that we got started, but we have to move faster, we have to move better, and we have to make this really stick. And so hopefully together, the Race to Zero, the EPRG, and the members of these newly formed working groups can really provide that additional clarity and depth as we learn to recalculate our trajectories and really make that moonshoot happen. So thanks, everyone. I think with that, I can pass to my colleague, Lisa Benjamin.
Yes, thanks. Jessica, Lisa, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I just, my video has to be started by the host, but I'm here, so you can hear me, even if you can't.
Yeah,
even if you can't see me. I'll start. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today and to be part of the Race to Zero initiative and the expert peer review group. These kinds of initiatives are so important to be able to provide some structure to what is the most important issue facing our generation. And I think it's also really important to realize that these initiatives themselves have to be reflexive. And so I'm really happy that we're having this criteria consultation process. I'm going to just speak very quickly because I know we want to leave time for Q&A. So I'll really just focus on 2 points, the what and the how. So we know from COP26 that the activities of state actors, even though we've had all of these net zero commitments, are not enough. And so that's going to put a lot more pressure on non-state actors. And so this initiative that looks at non-state actors, state actors, and also subnational actors is so important. And what we do now is important. And so these statements have all been great. But there are levels of inconsistency with the statements. And it's really important now that we have to move beyond these statements to actual action. And so that idea of proceeding and having clear targets and the interim levels of targets and actually ambitious targets that you actually implement in transition plans, I think is a really important level that we're going to be looking at in the Race to Zero initiative. And we know that translating into policy is hugely important, but there are going to be areas where government policies either are incomplete or missing entirely. And so that really does mean the non-state actors are going to be critical in this journey, in this Race to Zero. And so it's important that when we look at these statements that they are, as Jess has said, credible. And so I just published a report on climate washing and greenwashing recently with some co-authors. And so there's a lot of pressure around the statements that are being made. And so I think the way that Race to Zero can help is by providing some structure to the implementation of those. And then finally, I want to talk the second point about how. It's what we do is important, but how we do it is also really important as well. And so these transition plans have to be just and equitable. They have to consider and take care of the most vulnerable members in our society. And it's not important just to include state and non-state actors in the global south, but it's important for actors in the global north to think about their relationships with the global south. And for non-state actors, that means a really broad swath of action, like procurement and supplies and the kinds of goods and services that they provide, but also the workspaces within which they are making these decisions. And so the workspaces themselves should also be diverse, equitable, and inclusive so that there are the right people at the right level in the organizational hierarchy, including from the global south, making the right decisions about equitable solutions to carry us forward. I think for a long time, a lot of companies thought, well, if we're just providing renewable energy, that's enough. And some companies haven't been thinking about this until very recently, not only climate solutions, but how they provide those solutions equitably. And so I think that the implications of climate actions and how they are implemented is going to be incredibly important moving forward. And so I'm really excited to be part of this public process. I'm really interested in being involved and making sure that we are listening to not just criticisms, but also ways that we can improve and be more reflexive moving forward. So I'm really excited to be part of this, and I'll end here so we have a few minutes for Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and all previous speakers. You've done great on the substantive content and also on timing, giving us enough time for the Q&A. So really grateful for all your words and support here. I'm gonna get some of the questions we've got so far, and I'm gonna take a few of them and ask the team and colleagues to address the other ones. I will ask everyone to turn on their cameras now to the panelists, to all of you, turn on your cameras to join us now. First question we've got, it was related to how is the ESG expert group, who will be representing the transparency and the credibility piece, accountability piece there. So for you to know, we know, as I think Nigel mentioned, we're aware that the climate action team from the ESG have set up a terms of reference. We know there's an initial short list of membership of those to be announced, but this it haven't come out yet, so we don't have the exact names and how the membership of this expert group will be. We will share with all of you as soon as it goes public. So we're not totally aware of that. There's a second question related to the role of Lindsay. Thank you very much, Lindsay Levin, for the question about which are the underlying tensions that we are seeing between net zero and the campaign and the criteria and the challenges on the way forward. And our friend Tom Hale has wrote a great paper on the governance on net zero on the way forward and how we are this inflection moment that you were showing. So I would like to ask Tom first, if you want to answer that question, and maybe ask Nigel afterwards, considering that we still have him on the room to provide his perceptions there. So Tom, could you answer, please?
Thank you, Ramiro, and thanks for the question. So it'd be very surprising if the most important policy challenge we all face today, the biggest transition human society has ever taken as an economic project, were completely uncontroversial, right? Because these are fundamentally tied to the economy, to power, to all the things that drive contestation. So we're doing our job well if we're coming to the thorny, meaty topics. And I'm happy to say that the list of 8 working groups, really is kind of a tick box for the hardest challenges in the net zero one, and one that groups on this call, people across our community, people across the world, vehemently, strongly disagree on in lots of ways. So that's really the objective of this process, is not shy away from that, but to really try to create a process that's going to hold the hard conversations, but also make progress on them, and to do so not just this year, but into the future. These are not things we're going to attempt to try to resolve. But we have this really unique opportunity, I think, to use this particular kind of structure to approach them in a way that's new, that's different, that can involve a wider range of people. Just to say that once I think people will be sure to think about things about policy advocacy. This was one of the other questions here. People are interested in how the actions cities or governments or companies are taking in their own net zero transitions align to the lobbying they're doing in their policy processes, right? That's a really important theory, one to think through. Or around the use of offsets. People are interested in making sure we don't see offsets as a way to delay or substitute for decarbonization, which I think we can all agree on. How you do that in practice, the details of what's allowed and what's not allowed, and under what conditions and by whom, these are really important things to get into much more depth. So it's a great question, and look forward to getting into the hard discussions in the weeks to come.
Great, thanks, Tom. Good comments. Nigel, you've been well experienced in getting into the details of these tensions. Comments from your side?
Yeah, it's a good question, I think, and there are different sources of tension. I would say sometimes the tension, as I kind of refer to this, sometimes the tension has been addressed really well by the exit peer review groups and the members, but those critics haven't read the detail of that work, right? So I think, for example, offsets very clearly dealt with in the you look at the work that SBTI, for example, which underpins many of the partner programs, has done on offset. I actually think we're in pretty good shape there, but quite often people criticize without, I see something just in the paper today that nearly all corporate pledges are based on massive use of offsets. It's just not true. You can't, that doesn't fit with the Race to Zero criteria, right? So somewhere it's really about education and repetition and pointing people to the detail and making sure that it's easy to understand the criteria we have set. Some, I think, where it's a question of us really following the science, and the kind of very rigorous work that many of the partners do. I think some of them where we are very clearly focused on the policy. The tension has been, I think, there's been two things that I've heard. One, that we're promoting voluntary mechanisms instead of regulation. So we're trying to always make clear that we're not. We always talk about the ambition loop. We want this to get regulated as quickly as possible, but it's not regulated now. So we're trying to encourage that. And again, I hope the Secretary General's group can do that. And then there are some tensions where I think we've got to find a pragmatic, like some people would like no one to be in the Race to Zero who hasn't already reduced their emissions in line with the science. And I think we're just trying to be pragmatic about giving people enough time to say we're committed and then come up with a plan and then implement it, but not so much time that it's flaky. So that's a judgment call. And for example, that's something that, remember, Science Based Targets Initiative was launched in 2014. Initially, there was a long kind of gestation period allowed, and that got tightened up. So I think it's a question of sometimes it's better education, sometimes responding really proactively, and sometimes it's a judgment call. And whenever it's a judgment call, you never can satisfy everybody.
Right, thanks, Nigel. Thank you very much to both for your questions there. There's another question on timing that I think Paula addressed it very well during her intervention, and that came later on. So thanks, Paula, for that. Someone's just asking on how we're going to deal with the pushback on some members. It could have some pushbacks on how to strengthen our need and request to strengthen the criteria. Let me share an initial reaction on my side and then give Nigel the floor there. Very much, I think we are aware, and since we launched Race to Zero campaign, we launched it as a race, particularly acknowledging that the different stage of progress on this on implementation of net zero commitments, considering this is still very much an undergoing process, and we're learning how to address and how to truly reach net zero as the science requires us on doing that. And so there are different levels on there. What we're doing in many cases is identify which are those best practices and highlighting which are the pioneers, which are those who are in a positive way winning this race, and which are more on the starting line, and trying to give the space for all of them and provide these kind of opportunities like this criteria consultation process as an opportunity to share knowledge and align and get more convergence between the different type of commitments that we have, and trying to raise the bar every time that we're working on. So I think part of the role of Race to Zero, it is particularly to help us, all of us, to raise the bar in a more gradual way and peer into peers that are working together. So I think so far, this pressure element, it's been built internally as part of the campaign, and the members by themselves, they are getting into this race mode and trying to be better and better on their own work and commitments. Nigel, do you want to comment on that? Or are we still looking for other questions?
Yeah, no, I think it's mainly about having a good and transparent consultation process, and we've always been clear, as you say from the beginning, that we will review criteria from time to time. I mean, there are different types of shifting of the goalposts, right? And I think, actually, again, I go back because it's the one with the longest history to the science-based targets. When it was launched in 2014, remember, we only had data sets for 2-degree targets. So it was launched with a standard based on 2 degrees. And then we had the Paris Agreement, which said well below 2 degrees. Took a while before there were data sets available to actually create methodologies in line with Paris, less than 1.2. And so that was done, I think, in 2016, maybe 2017. I lose track. And then of course we had the IPCC report, October 2018, when I was at Women Business, we agreed we'll all start focusing on 1.5 then. And so it was like 2019, probably, before Science-Based Targets changed its criteria. So I think it's normal to change criteria when the science changes, or when you see there's a weakness, like the lack of any policy element. And then it's a question of having a good, transparent process and not being silly on timing. Like if you tell everyone you've got to change tomorrow, that's silly. If you say you've got 5 years to change, that's silly. So you've got to be clear about the basis on which you're making decisions, transparent about it, and then pragmatic and fair about changing the criteria. But I think it's a normal process. And then the other thing, of course, is to go to the accountability piece, which means that we will ultimately have to remove people from the Race to Zero who, despite meeting the criteria of their targets, are not following up on them. So I think that's something that will come as part of that other pillar that Fiona talks about.
Great. Thanks to everyone on this call. The final question there from Sally Foote, which I thank for it, which I think is very important, addressing the challenges about how we manage time between the resources that are spending on clarifying the criteria, the internal processes, the code that we set up, and the time those same teams need to invest on doing the concrete actions and the concrete work to actually reduce the emissions. So there's a kind of trade-off and a balance we need to keep there between things. And we expect, Sally, that under this campaign and under this sort of work, we actually try to make easier the work of the technical people later on, because they have more clarity and they avoid mistakes about the lexicon, how to set the key goals, the key priorities about where to put their efforts. And so I think we hope this collective effort and this review of the existing criteria, it is an input that helps all the technical people of your organizations to accelerate their own setting and their own internal plans and actions to work there. Hopefully that will do. We've got 2 minutes left. So I want to thank all of you on this, for all this initial session and the speakers. I would really like, I think we really noticed during this session how we are entering into a new phase of Race to Zero and the campaign, where credibility in many ways is going to be a key part of the process during 2022. We're going to have different working streams and working groups dealing to this process and helping to provide more clarity and more transparency in all the efforts that we are all doing here. We do want this process to help us to enhance the alignment and the convergence around the existing metrics and internal methodologies of each of the initiatives and each of the partners to support the members of the campaign. And hopefully you are seeing that on this annual process that we're setting up, we're trying to listen and to learn from the previous experiences. And so this time we decided to structure these different topics, which we believe they are addressing the key areas of interest and the key concerns that we raised during last year and during the past. So we do expect that you will engage these processes and join in the different working groups. The expression of interest for the working groups will close this Friday, 28th of January. So please share your expression of interest to want to join each of the different groups, and we will finalize the design of this group to ensure there is diversity, balanced representation from sectors and from different type of entities by the Friday, 4th of February. So we can start, these working groups can start working directly on Monday the 7th for the next couple of months. Once we finish this process internally, we will have another session to share with you the main outcomes of these working groups, get your additional inputs, and have the opportunity to have written submissions as well during the press. So stay connected, stay tuned with us to hear the progress that we're working for during the sessions. With this, I would like to thank you again to all the speakers. You've done a great job and make my life very easy during the last hour, and really looking forward for all the outcome that we're going to have on this session, working groups in the next weeks. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Over 200 people here. This was amazing. Thanks.